In questo momento però sono certa
I cannot see anyone, but I am sure that you're all there. So I would like to introduce myself. I'm Manuela Moreno, and I will moderate this next panel. I would like to welcome all of you, all the speakers and panelists. Also, this session will be online, something that we have learned to see. We will have a first exchange with 3 interventions, and then we will have a second time with another 3 speakers and panelists while we wait for Minister Andrea Orlando, Minister of Labour. As soon as he will join us, we will stop and give him the floor. Each panelist has 7 minutes. Please stick to the time given to you so that we can all take part in the panel. So let us start with our discussion with this session. This session has to do with the importance of quality jobs for women. COVID-19 has increased the rooted gender gap in the labor market. So I would like to ask you what to focus on themes such as the social inclusion of women, these are all elements that are fundamental for a better future, a world in which everyone has equal access to promote a better society, especially in the post-pandemic COVID. In order to promote the Brisbane commitment in world leaders, it is necessary, world leaders need to put at the center of their attention also unpaid care work and unpaid domestic work. This needs to be done by involving governments, communities, families, and society and partnerships so that there can be an equal access to development opportunities. So I would like to immediately introduce the first panelist, Emanuela Tomei, Director of the Department of Conditions of Work and Equality, Work Quality at the ILO. So I would like to start by asking her why the quality of work is key to achieve the Brisbane commitment 25 by 25. So what are the policies, what are the legal measures that according to the ILO governments should implement to achieve this goal? You have the floor. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by highlighting why the quantity and the quality of jobs is important for women and gender equality. Getting more women into employment means higher growth for countries, a larger pool of talents for enterprises, and for women, greater economic autonomy and say in personal and family decisions. More money into women's pockets also results into higher expenditures in children's health and education. But to attract more and retain more women in paid work, we need to make sure that jobs are worth their time and talents and respectful of their dignity. In other words, we need work that is decent, quality jobs. And this is not yet the case. Why? One important reason is that women, regardless of their educational attainments, family status, or aspirations, continue to be treated as secondary earners, since caregiving is seen as their main role. Globally, women perform 2/3 of housework and unpaid care work, which means a trade-off between time devoted to homes and families and availability to engage in paid work. Hence, it is not surprising that often women choose or are compelled to opt for fields of studies or work trajectories that are more compatible with their unpaid work shift. Often these jobs involve shorter hours, are more insecure or unpredictable, and low paid. In emerging economies, more women than men end up working informally, that is, in poor working conditions, higher risk of exposure to violence and harassment, and limited, if any, social protection. Highly skilled women also face challenges. They are often the least to be considered for a promotion and earn typically less than their male peers with equal qualifications. We found, for instance, that in Europe, the larger the share of women in a company's workforce, the lower the average wages controlling for productivity. 2 implications stem from this. Companies and the world of work more generally believe that they don't need to change, and women are the ones to be fixed to fit the mold. This has the effect of discouraging or making it difficult for many women to remain in paid employment or imagine a future in non-traditional occupations. It is therefore not surprising that increases in women's employment globally, including in a number of G20 countries, have been very modest in the past years. And in the face of the disproportionate toll of the pandemic on women's employment and labor incomes, we need unprecedented policy efforts for women to return to work and to work that is decent. The recent adoption of the Catania's roadmap towards and beyond the Brisbane target, more, better and equally paid jobs for women by the G20 Ministers of Labour, is an important step in this direction, and the Italian presidency and Minister Orlando are to be commended for this result. Through the roadmap, the G20 countries commit to work towards improving women's employment trends and measure progress in respect of key indicators concerning the quality of work, including low pay, part-time and informal employment. So what does the ILO recommend? Transformative and measurable gender equality is to be at the core of the recovery efforts. And this involves action in at least 5 policy areas. First, gender-responsive employment policies for an inclusive and job-rich recovery. This means macroeconomic stimulus packages that boost aggregate demand with a focus on women's quality employment and incomes, policies that support sectors in which women prevail, and active labor market policies for the equitable integration of women into productive employment. Second, investments in the care economy to enhance the infrastructure, the staffing, and working conditions in education, health, social work, and domestic work, which are key not only to people's well-being, but to societal and economic resilience, as the pandemic has shown. And the care economy is an important source of jobs, especially for women, and facilitates the reconciliation of paid work and unpaid care work for both men and women. Maternity, paternity, and parental leave, together with well-designed, flexible working arrangements, can also facilitate co-responsibility at home. A third area of policy action is the reduction of the gender pay gap by promoting equal pay for work of equal value. Adequate laws, including transparency laws, and enforcement alongside dialogue and cooperation with and between employers and workers and their organizations are essential. And adequate minimum wages can also go a long way in supporting women's economic autonomy given their concentration in low-paid jobs. Fourth, eliminate violence and harassment in the world of work. Gender-biased violence at work and at home are 2 faces of the same coin. The ILO Convention 190 provides a useful framework for action to end violence and harassment at work, including mitigating the impact of domestic violence on women's paid work. And last but not least, it's very important to work towards universal access to adequate social protection to reduce gender gaps in social protection coverage. And well-designed tax finance benefits with social insurance can also help promote transitions from the informal to the formal economy, and ensuring that girls and boys, women and men enjoy adequate social protection throughout their lives. In sum, if G20 countries are to honor their commitment taken at Brisbane of creating 100 new million jobs for women by the year 2025, they need to improve the quality of their work and reward it fairly. Thank you very much.
You presented many elements on which we can discuss, on which we shall discuss later. Now I would like to ask the second speaker, the second panelist, Chiara Saracen, who's honorary fellow at Fondazione Collegio Carlo Alberto. Now, we heard that the COVID pandemic has increased the gender gap that was already rooted, that it was already prevalent in the labor market. How can we now try and balance and exploit this occasion to bring about more equality?
È collegata con noi.
Is Chiara Saraceno connected with us? I can't hear. If she's not with us, we can move to the next speech. If the technicians can inform us, please. I have no instructions from the technical staff. I would like to know if Chiara Saraceno is connected with us. I can't hear anything at all. Shall we move on? Marco Paduano should be with us. Am I correct? President? Yes, I'm here. Good morning. Good morning to Marco Paduano, head of the board of the A2A group. I'm president of the committee. You probably heard the speech of Mrs. Tomei. Can we talk about gender equality as a key factor in the private sector and in your group, for example? How does it work? Shall I repeat the question? Yes, please, because I had no connection right at the moment of the question. I just was introducing you, and then I asked you if you heard the previous speech by Director Tomei to move on with this topic, gender equality is a key factor in the private sector, also in a group like yours. How are you organized? Yes, of course.
Would you prefer to switch to English or it's okay with Italian?
As you prefer. Come preferisce, abbiamo la traduzione simultanea.
We have the translation. Very well. So right now, a lot has been debated on the allocation. That is the leitmotif of the recovery plan, of this huge quantity of funds that are being made available. When we talk about resources, we tend generally to talk about financial assets. We are trying to contribute to this debate, not much in terms of financial resources, but rather the human capital allocation. That's human-based resources. Of course, it's quite evident that every time we organize a financial project, we try to allocate at best the resources that are made available. When we talk about the human capital, we have a pool of resources. That's the talent resources, the talent of people working with us. And often we end up using a part of this pool of resources, of this human capital. So we talk about human capital allocation that is often not efficient. So we cannot give up a very important component in the distribution of the talent of our human capital. That's why our group has launched a process that's called GEA, Gender Equality in A2A, which is basically a systematic approach to gender equality. So it's not only referring to gender equality as an aspect, rather. Well, of course, Mrs. Tomei stressed that the issue of gender equality should be approached systematically.
Lo stiamo cercando di affrontare sostanzialmente in diversi momenti della vita della persona all'interno del percorso lavorativo in A2A. C'è il momento della Human Capital Selection. Esiste un falso mito che le aziende tecnologiche hanno una predominanza del gender maschile perché così è quello che producono le università. È sempre meno vero. Noi troviamo che nella fase di selezione, avendo un migliore bilanciamento nei criteri di selezione, già in fase di introduzione anche su skill particolarmente tecnici, si inizia a parlare di ingegneri e non ci si riferisce necessariamente a degli uomini. Aggiungo che nell'ambito di realtà complesse come la nostra, la quantità di attività che sono gender neutral sono semplicemente impressionanti. Una seconda parte è quello che noi chiamiamo Human Capital Empowerment. Questo è un processo che è mirato a cercare di aumentare anche un certo grado di self-confidence da parte del gender, della componente femminile del nostro bacino di talenti, che non abbia la tentazione di porsi da soli degli elementi di limitazione. Perché non ci credo, perché inizio a entrare in un mood che intanto non si può fare. Abbiamo definito dei progetti di mentoring dove i nostri talenti, soprattutto quelli al femminile, appunto hanno un processo dedicato di mentoring. Abbiamo tutto un tema di inspirational talks dove una serie di role models dimostrano che si può fare, e non solo che si può fare, ma che si può fare anche in un'ottica di sentivo prima parlare del
the fact that women shall balance more works jointly, unpaid and paid ones. So there is a false myth that for women, in order to perform a career, shall give up their lives after work or sacrifice their lives after work, outside of the work. So we're trying to introduce these inspirational talks by women. We can demonstrate through their experience and actual experience that we cannot give up any component of one's lives to be a professional of success, because again, we cannot afford renouncing such an important part of the human capital allocation. So everything would be disappointing if we didn't have a targeted welfare system. Needless to say that the most delicate moment in which the female talents risk of losing themselves is maternity. We are tackling this aspect with a whole set of programs ranging from the more traditional one, nurseries and kindergartens, with an initiative that's what we call flexible benefits, that is giving the possibility to transform some benefits in flexibilities in a job, so improving the lifetime balance for women. So, well, I wouldn't say that we have reached all goals and everything is fine, because when we keep on looking at the pyramid of data where we have reached the presence of women in the top management team, well, the share is still far from being equal. This issue has been tackled by the whole board of directors as a priority in-house, not because we have to favor women, but we do not have to discriminate women. So that's the issue that is extremely important to us. So we sat as a guideline, as a guidance, as an organization. We have to try and increase the number of women also in top positions with a greater balance. We have set up precisely a committee, that ESG committee, that is chaired by the president of the board of directors. Inside the works of this committee, the issue of gender equality is, of course, an important priority. I hope I've stuck to my time slot. Yes, you have been perfect. Also because now the Minister Orlando, Minister of Work, has arrived. So there will be a presentation and his speech in the debate, and then we will resume our round table of speeches. Minister, are you ready? So we will give you back the line in a few minutes. Let me thank Minister Orlando for his pleasant presence and attendance. It's very important because, as you all know, women's job is at the center of the works of GW20. The first question I'd like to ask you, we are two men talking about gender equality. Is it a step forward or a step back? There's no order. Well, I think it's a step forward. This theme has been included in our agenda, in the men agenda, so it's not to be given for granted. And I believe that we are living this as an element that influences the competitiveness of systems, the level of cohesion, and it's an important cultural shift. So I don't think that the fight for gender equality is just to be delivered to women's fight. That's a battle for social systems and democratic balances that should be more advanced. I think it's a battle we should all embrace. Today, von der Leyen intervened at our summit and said that women still today have to search for an alternative, either care for the family or work and concentrate on the career. You come from the G20 on labor that was held some days ago in Catania, where, as the leader Laura Sabatini said today, you made many steps forward. So what do you feel sharing to the delegates coming from all over the world? Many are here attending, many are connected. We talked about the volume of job places to increase, work for women, also quality of work. So what would you say to these delegates? I say that if it is needed, if it was needed, well, the pandemic has highlighted this need even more, because care work has increased and care work has been a burden mainly of women. This made this alternative, this need even more dramatic to take a choice for women. And if you consider also the wage gap, you realize the rationale for which many women get out of the labor market, and many were compelled, forced to leave the labor market. It was not only women cast aside due, according to figures, the fact that on average women are more employed with fixed-term contracts that were not renewed. But we have to think at this picture in our mind, in the kitchen or in the living room of the families. When family members decided we were supposed to go back to work, they decided that men were to go back working, and women, for women it was less convenient in terms of the family budget and the wage. It was even more difficult because women usually have the burden of the care work. So these two factors had a great impact and have a too high impact still today. That's why I think that we have on the one hand to strengthen social infrastructures and so make this alternative less drastic for women. On the other hand, care work should no longer be a prerogative or to a lower extent of women. And third, working on the wage gap, because that's an element that, of course, guides the convenience of certain choices beyond the stereotypes and traditions, which have, of course, a role. And then in the family budget, it is decided that the person who's supposed to stay at home is the one who earns lower wage, and that's women. So this is another issue that we have to tackle in G20. I think we made a step forward, an important one, for a precise reason. First of all, the context. We're talking about, of course, I want to make a diplomatic incident. Anyway, not all countries are characterized by this urgent need for gender equality. Let's put it in this way. Instead, this issue was more than welcomed and received as a core topic from everyone, because, as you know, that you proceed only if you have a unanimous consensus. So this it was one of the 3 points in the agenda was transposed, and this is another step forward because we identified certain targets that not only indicate certain objectives, as it often happens in this declaration, but there is an annex enclosed to the declarations of ministers. There were certain targets set down which indicate which are supposed to be the step forwards, the progress obtained in the next year, that are even more ambitious than the Brisbane ones, which indicated certain targets. I think that it was a great part of the debate, and I believe that this choice was impacted by the lesson learned in the pandemics, social welfare and inequalities, the quality of work and gender equality at work wouldn't be so easily accessible and wouldn't get that sharing, that wide sharing, if we didn't have the lesson of the pandemics. So we have to grasp this opportunity. We have to know that this disruption is not going to last forever. Of course, I don't want to be pessimistic, but not always the humans do learn from their mistakes and limits. So it's not to be given for granted that this awareness is going to last forever. Anyway, I think we have to grasp this opportunity today because we have a global favorable context to have certain fallbacks also in the international context. It is usually said that these declarations have a limited value. Well, first of all, one of the parameters indicating the objectives is not only principle-based indications. Instead, these indicators provide to civil societies and NGOs and all the different stakeholders fighting for the implementation of these rights some points of reference, some themes on which to leverage, because many countries of the G20 today are going to fight, are going to demonstrate in the squares or make a fight at the parliament to reach these goals, and this cannot be the case, as it happened on other occasion, to be considered the enemy of the interests of that country, because this was going to be demonstrated according to the declarations that those countries have underwritten. So it depends also on internal relations, on how these fights can be supported and movements. This can make the difference. I think that this inclusion in the agenda is very important, and it was supported by leading countries that shared our approach. To go back to the issue of social infrastructures, we can say that the Italian government, but also the G20 governments, are going to commit themselves for, I wouldn't say a big plan, but at least a plan for social infrastructures, because this topic of care, as you already mentioned, has a consequence on the women. Children care, the care for the elderly, disabled. In the end, this is all on the shoulders of women. The PNR can also be a further tool that provides us those means to tackle this topic and let it become not only a national or European plan, but a world plan. The Italian PNR has set ambitious goals as regards the strengthening of social infrastructures, thinking at the 3 billion on self-sufficiency, 4 billion on nurseries, and all in all, the strong investment on healthcare and social expenditure. There has been a debate, fair debate, on the fact that maybe we could invest more on social infrastructures, but I think that the focus in this stage has to be shifted on the actual expense capacity, because unlike in certain fields, the use of resources will strongly be influenced by the market. In terms of social infrastructures, this is less intuitive. So we have to monitor, we have to be extremely careful, because resources that are unprecedented in recent history have to be used promptly. Maybe more than 4 billion will be needed to have the right nurseries all over the country, but we have to say that the country never had 4 billions to invest in nurseries. So the risk that this money is not used promptly is so big that I think that in this regard we shall have a specific, strict monitoring in this regard. Other sectors will be influenced by general economic trends, digital, ecological transition. Social infrastructures instead run the risk in this regard to be less influenced by strong players on the market. So I think that this is a peculiar focus we shall cast, because out of this success or failure, an important part of the debate is at stake. So we said not only because women are more directly engaged in the care work, but also because women are those who pay the most. The lack of structures that would alleviate their work care. I would like to add a further remark, maybe a concern, but at the same time an opportunity. Care work that has been considered for a long time residual has regained a central role after the pandemics, and we all realized what it means to have or not to have a welfare system, to have or not a person following you, assisting you, caring for you during a disease or a difficult moment, resorting to services that can react promptly in the moment of a difficulty or need. So let us exploit the atmosphere that has arisen. It is difficult to find beyond politicians those who think that public health care is not needed or public social services are not needed, that the centrality of the public scope in the implementation of this structure is not useful. Before the pandemics, it was not like this, and this is going to go on for a longer time. Maybe there could be a more profit-oriented approach, less careful of social dividends or investments. Of course, we have to fight against these trends, but we have to act promptly in order to reach these goals. Today, we have some positive signs, because after the months in which there was a fall in women's occupation, the first signs of these months up to June are reporting a recovery of women's work, coming back of women into the labor market. We are still confined to fixed-term contracts, so it's not an open-ended. These are not open-ended contracts, but it is at least a step forward. There is another good news that maybe could be considered not relevant, but instead it is really important, according to the analysis of tools to counter poverty. I would like to thank the social partners who obtained this result. Confindustria Servizi has just finalized the contract of multi-services cooperatives that was not renewed for more than 10 years now. Why am I saying this? Because it's a matter of the sector. Well, 600,000 people work, and this is mainly women. So when you say, why do not we have a return? Well, the issue of wages is really over-neglected, especially in less qualified works of services, and the fact that there is a new contract that is recognizing monthly more than €100 increase per contract. That's a good news, and we hope it's not to be just a single case. A final question: in the report issued by the G20 in Catania, you also referred not only to public or private work as employees, but also the factor of the women, that added value that women can give in the entrepreneurship. That's the focus that is present also in these works. Usually or often, women's entrepreneurship is considered at the margins. Incentives are just a few. Training programs are not properly developed. Financial assets are not allocated. So from this point of view, what can we improve? What can we do more? What did you say in Catania about this? Well, in all reconstruction plans or recovery plans, we tackle these issues. So in our PNRR, we can do more, meaning that working on training programs is very important. We can work increasingly to avoid excluding women's businesses or considering this just marginal or residual compared to the overall business world. This could be the turning key to recover the competitiveness in certain sectors. And moreover, I believe that we should also dwell on the issue of active policies at work. We are going to perform more than 4 billion investments, so the attention attached to active policies for women will be very high. And it has to be strongly related also to the self-entrepreneurship dynamics. Let us not forget that among the loss of jobs, one of the biggest share was women's work, autonomous work, and professional jobs. This is part of the jobs that is less protected. So when a crisis hits, like a pandemic, this is the most exposed. So it should be the most supported when we have to determine a recovery. Well, we are over. Just the very last question. What kind of commitments, before leaving us, do you think you can take in the next months in order not to let the work that the Italian presidency fade away? What has been done up to this year, when it is going to be concluded in December, how is the commitment of the Italian government or your personal commitment going on for gender equality, women's work, to enhance work? Well, we had a bilateral meeting with those who are going to follow the next presidency, and we are committed to keep open channel to verify that this topic stays at the core of the agendas also in the next G20. What can we do next? Each one of us at home shall reach the targets. The PNR, in this point of view, is in line with the target objectives we have set to close. I think it's extremely important from both from the political and the practical viewpoint. That's 30% of women's hiring in organizations participating to the PNRR. I think we have to not only monitor so that this clause is fully enacted, but to have it become a matrix that it regards not only the PNRR, but the whole of public investments that are going to be accomplished. If we were to multiply this reasoning for all the public tenders and services and all the different scopes in which we can really act proactively to really make the difference on economic trends, I think that we are going to get a great return as a consequence. So I think that from this point of view, the choice of putting this in the right scope, in including this in the plan to identify the model that we want after the pandemic. So we keep on saying that we do not want things to be as they were before. We have set it down in writing, and we want work not only to be a job, but a quality occupation that would grant rebalancing in gender equality. If this is the target, we have to make it become an objective that would have an impact 100% on the market, starting from the public scope and what the public can do to guide the market. I think that if we are capable of making this further step forward, we can get an important result. We committed ourselves so that this clause would not only be, digression in a bigger dynamic. Instead, this can be the enabler of the trigger of a virtuous cycle that would influence the whole economic model. Thank you, Minister.
And let us give the floor back to Manuela Moreno and her panelists. Thank you, Manuela.
Questo dibattito io ritornerei adesso con i miei.
Right, so I will go back to my debate, to my panel. We also heard the Minister identifying three fundamental points at the beginning of his speech. That is to strengthen social infrastructure, so the care work should be shared, and then the pay gap. Now, I would like to continue with our panelists. I remind them that they only have 7 minutes so that we can give the possibility to everyone to take the floor. Now, let us move to Badile Mizikaka, head of the Networks, Partnerships and Gender Division of the OECD Development Center. I would like to ask you what is the link, the connection between women in the in the labor market, and why is an unpaid care work so difficult? Why is it so difficult to address? And what are the data that the OECD has found on this specific issue?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you to the Italian W20 presidency. So let me start by telling you how where I'm going to take you. You see, we look at social norms from the perspective of drivers of inequality. So imagine an iceberg. What you cannot see is these laws, these norms, so these beliefs that people have of what the norm is, how things should be. And this is in turn driving inequalities in the outcomes. So this is what we've been discussing. So I come from the OECD. So what are we doing here? What's our contribution? So first of all, the SIGI, so the Social Institution and Gender Index, is a tool that measures formal and informal laws and practices that restrict the lives of women and girls and their access to empowerment opportunities. So we have used the SIGI and its data since the Japanese presidency of the W20 to produce a report. So you will soon have our full report that will be made available for the Italian presidency. And just so that you know, the SIGI is also an official data source for monitoring SDG indicator 5.1.1. Second of all, the OECD has played a big role, as many of you know, in monitoring progress towards the Brisbane target, 25 by 25, together with the ILO. And we will continue to support the Italian presidency in this roadmap towards the Brisbane target and beyond. That was just adopted a few days ago, as we've just discussed now, by G20 labor and employment ministers in Catania. So with that being said, we can say already from our data that half of the G20 members are on track to achieve the Brisbane target by 2025. But then the COVID crisis came, and that's been a severe issue, as many of you know. So this has taken us back, and by February 2021, across the OECD, 2% of employed women, that is informal employment, compared to 0.6% of men, had dropped out of the paid labor force. And I don't need to tell you that a lot of these women already were in the informal sector. So this is a major issue. Unfortunately, we do not have yet the full figure for the G20, but it doesn't bode well. So what are these hidden drivers of inequality in the labor market? So you referred to unpaid care work. Well, that's certainly one of them. So when you see that women have lower rates of labor force participation, this is because they have to perform much more unpaid care and domestic labor. So what does this include? This includes raising children, caring for the sick or the elderly, looking after family members, managing household tasks, or volunteering in the community. So already before the COVID crisis, women already spent 3 times more on unpaid care and domestic work than men globally, so across the globe. In the G20, this figure ranges from 1.5 times more in Canada. So in other words, Canadian women spend 1.5 times more doing unpaid care work than their male counterparts. Germany and the United States is the same, so 1.5 to 9 times more in India. So you can imagine that if you have to spend that much time in the home, you have less time for paid work, education, or leisure. And this does not do very well in terms of gender gaps because access to resources and opportunities are scarcer. You just do not have the opportunity to allocate time to those. So we have seen also lockdowns having a dramatic effect on unpaid care and domestic work. Lockdown measures themselves, it will not have escaped you that the closure of schools and childcare facilities made it that women are seen as the primary caregivers, and they're therefore had to sometimes drop their jobs, rearrange their hours, or give up some other activities, like if they were pursuing part-time studies, to take care of the kids. And then, of course, quarantine measures mean that, restaurants are closed. You need to actually cook food for the entire family. Maybe you had children studying in other places. So all of a sudden, this burden fell even more on women's shoulders. Add to that another important driver of inequality, which are restrictive masculine norms, and the fact that care is seen as inherently female. So these restrictive masculine norms are, if you wish, what it takes to be a real man. So some masculine norms are very constructive and leading to gender equality, and others are actually quite detrimental. So to give you an example, the belief that women's role at home is more important than their economic role remains very common in some G20 countries. So amongst the 12 countries with available data in the G20, the percentage of respondents reporting that when a woman works for a pay, children will suffer, range from 11% in Indonesia to 65% in Korea. So what we also observe is that in times of crisis, in many societies, people tend to go back to these kind of more traditional beliefs because they're scared, because they want to hang out to what they know. And this is what we're very concerned with in this current crisis, because you see, as I'm sure you can imagine, norms are very difficult to challenge and they take a very long time. Can you still hear me?
Sì.
Yeah, okay, sorry, because my control screen is frozen.
Silenzio religioso nell'ascolto.
We were simply listening to you in religious silence.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So this discriminatory masculine norms are, a real issue. And if you reverse this, in 2019, so before the pandemic, already 22% of respondents, though men and women, in G20 countries said that a man who stays home to look after his children is less of a man. I'm sure all of you have been confronted with such norms. When I travel for work, people always ask me who's taking care of the kids. And they say, oh, your husband is so amazing. But when he travels, nobody tells me I'm amazing. So these norms are deeply entrenched regardless of the countries. And they are a barrier to redistributing unpaid care and domestic work. Now, there is bright light at the end of the tunnel because there are policies that can make a difference. So just to give you a few examples, in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, the Ministry of Women of Argentina launched a campaign called Cuarentena con Derechos, Quarantine with Rights, to raise awareness on the importance of co-responsibility of parents for childcare. So, it's not like women have all the burden and men have all the rights. So I think also in terms of societal discourse, this is very important, coming from the state, so seen as somehow an authority, is an important message. In 2020, the French government announced the extension of the duration of paid paternity leave from 14 to 28 days. So, we're still not at parity, but we're getting there. It's doubled. And they've mandated father to take a week off to encourage parents to distribute care work more equally. We also know that fathers are more likely to take care of children if they've been involved since the outset. So that's also a way to bring about equality in these driving factors that are directly connected to the labor market. And then finally, in 2019, so before the COVID crisis, the Canadian government launched the Employment Insurance Parental Sharing Benefit, which will provide 5 additional weeks of benefits when both parents agree to share these benefits. So in other words, both parents take some time off if they want all of the benefits. So in other words, trying to change balance in a way that makes it a win-win for families, for children, but also for the labor market. So I will stop here. I hope I've not used too much of my time, and allow me to thank again the Italian presidency, the moderator, and other panelists. It's been a real honor to be with you. Thank you.
Per il suo contributo, grazie davvero. Io adesso vedrei che c'è collegato perché avevamo lasciato indietro Chiara Saraceno, non so se ci ha raggiunto. Ci ha raggiunto, se no vado avanti. Non la sento. Allora io andrei direttamente a vedere se c'è Erika Andretta. C'è? Eccola, Consumer Markets Consulting Leader in PVC Italia. Allora, come mai l'industria della moda è il fiore all'occhiello mondiale del Made in Italy e quali sono le opportunità e le sfide per le donne in questo settore? Mi piacerebbe sapere da lei.
Sta parlando con me?
Con Erika?
Ah no, io...
I'm not.
Lei è arrivata, allora io torno a lei. Va bene,
Ma
perché
io
siamo
ci sono
andati
da un
avanti
po'.
indietro, io non vedo,
Comunque,
quindi ho
vabbè.
difficoltà.
Chiara Saraceno, you were. Yes, there you are. Welcome. I had called you earlier, but I couldn't get in touch with you. Honorary Fellow at Fondazione Collegio Carlo Alberto. The COVID pandemic has increased gender inequalities. We heard it before. We talked about it with the minister. We heard you, what he said about that. So how can we give a balance in the labor market, and how can we find a direct balance between work and care work? Well, first of all, we have to make a distinction between what happens in the labor market, between what happens within a family, because of course the reason why many women lost their jobs during the pandemic is due to the fact that women work in some sectors, which not only in Italy have been hit hardest by the lockdown measures. So think about the women working in the labor market, in the retail sector, and so on. This is what happened to men during the financial crisis of 2008 that hit men hardest at the time, much more, harder than men. And the fact that this time women are more exposed, are more vulnerable, is even more serious because women are less employed than men, so the impact on them is more relevant. It hits a part of the labor market, of the labor force, that is already vulnerable for other measures, for other reasons. So what happened in the labor market was, of course, serious, and it affected sectors in which women are more present than men, but especially sectors that are less protected, less paid, and in which wages are lower. So these workers, both men and women, because there were also men who lost their jobs, well, these workers were less protected by social shock absorbers that existed. So in a way, they were vulnerable on two levels because they had no protection. They were already vulnerable in the labor market. Also, many of them were part-time workers, or some of them had a fixed contract. So what happened was that for many workers, their contract was not renewed, and therefore they couldn't have access to any welfare protection, social security protection. When the pandemic hit, when families had to decide how to reorganize, well, of course, if you earn less, if you have a temporary job, what seems more rational or natural is that you stop working, instead the men stop working. And therefore, this led to the fact that women had to bear most of the brunt of the care work. This also led to the reinforcement of some stereotypes, as the previous speaker said. There are also very deeply rooted cultural stereotypes for which, for instance, some parts of the domestic work is given only to women because men are not really good enough, or for instance children want to be at home with moms. So the two things together, especially in the societies in which gender asymmetry is heavier, like in Italy, and cultural stereotypes are still very strong, well, these two elements make it even more difficult for women to survive in this situation. Of course, there has to be a cultural shift at all levels, from the education level, the mass communication systems, the way in which newspapers tell things. There has to be a strong cultural change. But at the same time, we also need effective policies to bring about change, to encourage a more equitable distribution of domestic work. I'm a bit tired of hearing that, well, yes, of course, we need to implement policies to support women because it's mostly women who do care for the children, care for the disabled, care for various family members, as if we support women, but it's, their task, their job to take care of other family members. No, we must support them, but also to defend the dignity of dependent family members, to defend the autonomy not only of caregivers, but also of those who depend from their care, so that they do not really depend from the care of a family member. For instance, kindergartens have to favor the development of children and also equal opportunities among children. But at the same time, these are not responsibilities that are only to be assigned to women. So these policies need to concern all those who are engaged, are active in the care work. Care for the children, care for disabled, for the elders, and so on. So we need policies, we need a different narrative, but at the same time we need policies that encourage a redistribution, a more equitable distribution in the care work. In Italy, we see that most of the care work is assigned to women. For instance, think about the parental leave. Most of the parental leave is offered to mothers. But at the same time, we are seeing a shift in this. Of course, the maternity leave is taken by mothers because, of course, this continues to be a huge difference between men and women. However, when a child is born, there should no longer be such a deeply rooted difference between the person that cares for the child. The same goes also for people who are partially or totally not self-sufficient. For instance, in Italy, we believe that it's women who have to care for their older parents or for, their grandchildren. But there should be a redistribution of the care work, and this can be done only through policies. But if these policies only consider typically female tasks, we will not bring about this redistribution of the care work, which is fundamental for the well-being of everyone, and most especially for women, so that women can have more freedom to make their own choices also outside the family. It is also a cultural problem. Thank you, Cara Saraceno, for your contribution. Now, I would like to go to the other panelists that I had already mentioned. Erika Andretta, are you there? Customer market consulting leader at PwC Italy. Are you connected? Erika, good afternoon. So let us talk about fashion with you. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges for women in this sector?
So a quick glance of what fashion means according to the National Chamber for Italian Fashion, which is the non-profit association including the most important high-end brands and an end-to-end production system of over 60,000 manufacturers. The Italian fashion system is the first one in Europe with a production share of 41 points. The second one, Germany, has 30 points less. Spain and France has 33 points less rather than Italian manufacturing system. And it's the second one fashion manufacturing system at global level after China. But if you want to focus on high-end production, we are the first at global level. So it's very important for the ecosystem at global level. Before pandemic, the fashion system turnover was 100 billion euro, of which 70 billions as export. And as you know, had a reduction of 30 points last year in 2020. So taking account, considering this sector, which are the major challenges for women? The fashion industry in Italy employs mostly female workers, and I want to highlight workers. 70 point of total full-time equivalent are female, but they are positioned in the less qualified position, so in the production chain as workers. Going up to the C-suite and managerial roles, we have a good presence in the support area like finance, legal, communication, public relations, but less in the core business. If you are going on the top, so at CEO or board of director, as mentioned before by our minister Lau, the share is very low. It's lower than OECD data and of course other fashion system. The main fashion share of female in the board of directors reached only 21 points compared to the other fashion system like the French one, the British or the American competitors. We have a gap of 33 points. So there's a huge gap to fill. One could say that this is due to women lower educational level. However, according to Italian surveys supporting women in the luxury supply chain focused on Italy, conducted in November 2019, women's level of education is higher, 4 points more than men. One could say this is due to a lower attitude of women for entrepreneurship. This is also not true, as based on Federmoda data. Federmoda is the Italian association of small and medium entrepreneurs that combine both retail and manufacturing one. The level of independent women, so entrepreneurs of women in fashion, is 45 points, which is the higher rate compared to the entire production system. This is the second one and the first one in the professional services. So there's a huge rate, of course, also of women entrepreneurs in this sector. So I believe that's another gap, which is mostly cultural or system to fill. The first challenge is the gender pay gap. In 2020, we measured it together with the National Chamber for Italian Fashion, and the gap was equal to 20 points. It's a peer-to-peer benchmark. And we believe this data underestimated the gender differences since the statistics do not consider young professionals with on-call workers, part-time, stagiaire, and flexible contracts. So, which are the opportunities for the women? First of all, fashion and made in Italy will grow in the future. The current global fashion industry is valued at $3 trillion and could grow to $5.3 trillion in 2035. The system is mainly linear: take, make, waste, disconnected with the post-purchase phase. As Federica Marchioni mentioned this morning, there's a lot to do to grow the market, and women can take this opportunity due to circularity on material design and reuse, but thanks to digitalization, new technology, and sustainability that will increase the fashion market. We know that several companies are working on recycled fibers, digital 3D printing, virtual reality, recycled packaging, fabric care, resale, and we know that resale renting will double in the next 5 years. So there's a lot of opportunity also for women entrepreneurs to take advantage and to be an active part in this sector. Therefore, it's very important that from government point of view and system point of view, we will invest on digital upskilling that could provide women to reach the top position in the fashion industry. Indeed, investing in grants and scholarship to incentivize women to study STEM. I'm an engineer, for example. So we can give them a competitive advantage in the job market, and so we could have a new equilibrium that could be reached. Before leaving, I would like to highlight the two most important messages. The first one, measure is key. I discussed it and I give you a lot of data at the beginning of my speech. The second one is that we have to fill more or less 20 points in the next 15 years. 20 points to increase women in the board of directors, to fill the gender pay gap, so we can grow fashion and made in Italy in the global fashion system. And of course, we as PwC will continue to measure and to support government and fashion system to improve, as mentioned from our Bonetti minister this morning, to open the way for our daughters. Thank you.
Grazie, sono grandi sfide quelle che ci ha raccontato e ci ha dato uno spaccato in un settore specifico come quello della moda, che sappiamo essere il fiore all'occhiello del Made in Italy. Grazie anche per questo contributo. Andrei adesso da Michele Crisostomo, che è presidente del Consiglio di amministrazione del Comitato di Corporate Governance e Sostenibilità del gruppo Enel. È con noi. Presidente. Vediamo se è collegato.
Hello, can you hear me?
Sì, la sento perfettamente.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
Benvenuto. Allora, concentriamoci sui lavori verdi, il green. Quali sono secondo lei gli scenari futuri e le opportunità di lavoro per le donne in questo settore che possiamo considerare, vista la situazione in cui viviamo, ancora emergente, nonostante se ne parli da tanto tempo? Forse la spinta vera arriverà in questo momento.
Yes, no, thank you very much for this opportunity to go through what the job opportunities will be in the context of the energy transition, so that we can identify whether there are constraints on women benefiting from this jobs creation, deriving again from the energy transition, and what active policy we should be putting in place in order to tackle, these potential issues or these constraints. As we all know, an historical energy transition is taking place, pointing us towards a net zero emission economy based on the penetration of renewables, the expansion of smart grids, and the electrification of most energy consumption. And such a transition is characterized by a rapid development of low-carbon technologies, such as solar and wind power generation, power storage and electric vehicles, digital and flexible grids. And the new technologies show us that a shift from fossil fuels to zero-carbon energy sources, leading to decarbonization by 2050, in accordance also with the Paris Agreement, is not only feasible, but also reachable at a competitive cost. And the increasing replacement of fossil fuels with renewable energy sources has the potential to set in motion a vast number of changes in value chain localization and, of course, job opportunities. Renewable sources are far more distributed across states than fossil fuels and characterized by a virtually unlimited availability. And this, of course, turns into the creation of job opportunities at the local level, also considering the strategic development of regional value chains that can maximize the impact on the territory in terms of employment and indirect benefits. And moreover, because of the value chain of renewable energy is more labor-intensive than that of fossil fuels, the transformation promises net employment gains. And as concerns RES construction activities, the need to training and or reskilling people to perform most of the civil and electrical works in photovoltaic wind campsites results simplified if compared with the expertise competencies needed in thermal sites. So as concerns the overall RES value chain, employment opportunities are associated with equipment manufacturing and raw material processing, which both play a strategic role, not forgetting the structurally higher digitalization and decentralization of a renewable-based system, determining job opportunities in highly qualified sectors of our economy. And in particular, since the technology for the energy transition, such as solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries, need critical materials, the so-called rare earths, it is key to approach this transition within a circular economy focus from the beginning, in order to strongly reduce dependence thanks to redesign, new materials, reuse, closing the loop. So more generally, the transition to a circular economy has introduced new jobs that did not exist in a linear economy. Therefore, new skills are required, including expertise in about renewable and recyclable materials, reverse logistics, coding, innovation skills, and manual skills related to repair, maintenance, and recycling. Product design is at the core of a circular economy, since it is estimated that approximately 80% of products' environmental impacts are determined in the design phase. So this is expected to create new jobs despite automation. Furthermore, new combination of skills from different academic fields or a mix between academic and craftsmanship skills are needed. The skills should be multiple. Along with technical know-how about materials, software and product properties, general business skills are required, for instance, to manage the growth of the second-hand market. But also expertise in understanding the human rights impact of the supply chain is important. So alongside the creation of new jobs, for example, climate change scientists, energy auditors, and consultancy, carbon trading analysts, in a shift to a net zero economy, it is likely that some jobs will disappear and most of the jobs will change in content. Reskilling and upskilling will thus be required to address the social impacts of the transition. Then now we come to what the opportunities are for women. So advancing the transition will mean an increase in employment chances for women and men. However, when we talk about the energy industry, we talk about a traditionally male-dominated sector. So in the renewable area, available estimates suggest that men outnumber women in most workplaces, especially in technical, managerial, and policy-making positions. This means that unless measures are taken to train women in relevant skills and decrease occupational gender stereotypes, women will get only a fraction of the jobs created and will benefit only partially from the occupational chances of the transition. These efforts should start from the young girls, who belong to a generation more inclined than the past to sustainable issues, that nurtures a genuine interest on the climate question. We can indeed label this generation as sustainability natives. It is therefore crucial to inspire future generations of women to pursue STEM professions. Awareness and unbiased decisions about study path and professional development need to be spread even more to ensure a pipeline of women for the energy sector in the years to come. In Italy, a country where women's participation in the labour market at 53.1% is significantly below the EU average, which is 67.4%, only 24.6% of graduated in 2019 chose STEM disciplines, and the STEM graduated women represent only 16.2%, which is a very low number. Corporations then need to take stronger action to approach the gender gap with an organic set of actions that influence all phases of women's journey in the organization, from representation at entry level to empowerment and development in positions of responsibility, paying attention to various relevant moments in personal and professional life, with a specific attention to harassment. Of course, a comprehensive strategy that combines incentives with access to care services and measures to reconcile career and family life is crucial, and the Italian National Recovery and Resilience Plan goes exactly in this direction. Now, let me tell you something about what we do at Enel. Enel devotes a high level of attention to the people who work for the company. We call it people centricity, who are deemed to be key factors in the group's sustainable strategy. In its role as an energy transition leader, Enel strongly promotes the development of upskilling and reskilling programs intended to develop existing professional skills and create new occupational profiles. Enel's commitment to diversity and inclusion started in 2013 with the adoption of the Policy on Human Rights, followed in 2015 by the Diversity and Inclusion Policy, in parallel with the adoption of the 7 Women Empowerment Principles promoted by the UN Global Compact and UN Women in compliance with the UN Sustainability Development Goals. In 2019, the Workplace Harassment Policy was also published, which highlights the principle of respect for individual integrity and dignity in the workplace and addresses the issue of sexual and discrimination-related harassment. In 2020, the principles of the policy were recalled in the Statement Against Harassment in the Workplace published on the Enel website. In February 2021, Enel Group joined the signatories of the Equal by 30 campaign, a public commitment by public and private sector organizations to work towards equal pay, equal leadership, and equal opportunities for women in the clean energy sector by 2030, promoted by the Clean Energy Ministerial, with 3 commitments aligned to the overall gender holistic strategy: inspire future generations of women to pursue STEM professions, ensure 50% representation of women in shortlist by 2021, speed women's growth in the organization. The action of our Gender Gap Action Plan to ensure women representation and participation include, and those are really concrete actions that we already took, ensuring a balanced representation of both genders in the initial phases of the recruitment process, and the percentage of women in shortlist has raised constantly in the last years, reaching 42% in 2019, 44% in 2020, with a goal of 50% in 2021. Paying attention to the growth of women in management and middle management positions, including a public goal to increase women managers and middle managers target at 2023 of 20.6% managers, 30.6% middle managers, 29.7% managers and middle managers. Adopting internal policies addressing succession plan management and salary review processes which take into account the gender diversity, as well as the allocation of a budget dedicated to ensuring equal pay for equivalent roles. And in order to valorize, which is one of the measures that we have been adopting at the level of the Board of Directors quite recently, in order to valorize the Enel Group's commitment in ensuring a fair representation of women in the basis that supply the management succession plan, it has been introduced into the 2021 LTI for the management, a new performance objective with a weight of 5% of the total, represented by the percentage of women in management succession plans at the end of 2023. Launching initiatives to support women empowerment in the organization, promoting in all countries the presence various initiatives to raise awareness, especially for girls, on the opportunities arising in the fields of STEM. And we have been reaching over 10,000 female students worldwide in the last 5 years with our initiatives, providing flexibility measures to support the parental experience and to promote awareness of a gender bias-free culture, launching special services to support the COVID emergency, sustain family caring, work-life integration, and psychological well-being, launching a set of coordinated internal, global and local communication and training campaigns and initiatives to encourage the development of a bias-free and inclusive culture toward any diversity. Furthermore, in 2020, for the first time, Enel was included in the 3 main indices that monitor company performance on gender diversity. So, to conclude, a shorter personnel is one of the main constraints to the pace of the energy transition. Skills gaps and shortages are almost inevitable whenever any product or service appears, and the green economy is no exception to this. In the energy sector, women remain underrepresented for well-known reasons. Persistent stereotypes about gender roles, gender imbalances in the STEM fields, a lack of adequate awareness about career trajectories, lack of suitable actions in institutions and networks in both the private and the public sector. To fully realize its potential, the energy transition has to tap a wider pool of talent, notably that of women, to fill its growing needs for technical and soft skills. So to conclude, I'm really convinced that the new jobs opportunities derived from the energy transition will be for the benefit of women, to the extent that these new jobs opportunities will stem from STEM, and the women are invited to really follow this so that we can actually give a concrete dimension to all the efforts that we are making. Thank you very much.